Right, well, hi everyone, and welcome to our Theosophical Sundays. Trish has had many years as a counsellor and a therapist in private practice. She's trained in Hakomi, which is body inclusive therapy. She's done body-mind psychotherapy and many other therapeutic and energy healing practices, including healing touch. Trish is a meditation teacher in the tradition of the Ageless Wisdom teachings and a student of the esoteric philosophies. She's a teacher and consultant of the Enneagram. A lot of you will remember that. We had it at one of our immersion weekends last year. And she discovered that about 40 years ago and presents both in groups and also one-on-one. Trish's passion is working with others to understand who we are at the deepest level. She's particularly drawn to working with individual and group processes in retreat. Trish is a member of HPB Lodge, and tonight Trish is actually going to share part of her journey and who's been an influential part of her journey. So tonight's presentation is entitled The Poustinia of the Heart, the Call to Stillness.
And I shall begin by looking at the lives of two remarkable Russian women. Both have had an effect on many, many people and certainly on me. So the first person I'm going to speak about is Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, with whom you'll be familiar. The second is Catherine Doherty. She is a Russian mystic influenced by the Russian Orthodox Church. As I share something of Catherine's life, I shall be using her words, God and Christ. Please use whatever is your word to resonate with this, whether Buddha, Krishna, light, nature. It's not intended to be exclusive. Now, these women, HPB, as she is often known, on the left, and Catherine Doherty on the right, they were both born in Russia. Helena was born first, and both women were bridges in bringing Eastern spirituality to the West. So we owe them a great debt, I believe. So I'm going to speak about Madame Blavatsky first. She was born in 1831 and in Russia into an affluent family. And at 16, a marriage was arranged for her with a man 25 years her senior, a general named Nishpur Blavatsky. Helena Blavatsky was undoubtedly one of the most remarkable and controversial women who ever lived. She was a founder of the Theosophical Society, a prolific writer, and author of two massive cosmological works, Isis Revealed and The Secret Doctrine. Her influence upon modern occultism is incalculable. She was one of the first Westerners to insist on the importance of Eastern religion and philosophy, thus paving for today's popular acceptance of such things as transcendental meditation, yoga, vegetarianism, to say nothing of a steady stream of swamis and yogis who came around her time. Madame Blavatsky's life was one of extremes. She passed from wealth to poverty, from nobility to obscurity, from fame to notoriety. Then towards the end of her life, achieved triumphant success and the unabashed admiration of more than 100,000 followers scattered throughout the world. Her contemporaries, depending how they were disposed towards her, called her a fraud, a charlatan, a plagiarist, and also a genius, an adept, and an avatar. She was praised, damned, loved, criticized, respected, and condemned, but never ignored. She was a lifelong feminist, undaunted by the male society in which she lived. She asserted her equality and independence with such personal force and persuasion. She won grudging respect and even admiration from most men who knew her. Despite her flamboyance and worldwide recognition, surprisingly little was known about HPB, as she came to be called, until she emigrated to America in 1873 at the age of 42. She had lived an incredibly adventurous and varied life, as some of us may be familiar with. In 1948, she began a 20-year sojourn that took her, 1848. She began a 20-year sojourn that took her to the US, Canada, Mexico, Egypt, India, and according to her, to Tibet, although she chose not to divulge much of what happened during these wanderings. She has frequently alluded to a lengthy period at a Himalayan retreat in Tibet, where she was instructed by the Mahatmas, living avatars who had unlocked all the secrets of the universe and would ultimately lead humanity into a golden age. In 1875, in New York, Madame Blavatsky, along with Colonel H.S. Olcott, W.Q. Judge, and others, founded the Theosophical Society, Colonel Olcott being its first president. In the years that followed the Theosophical Society's founding, the movement spread through many countries in the world. I'd like to share now the great paradox, which really is my very favourite quotation from Helena Blavatsky. The great paradox. In 1 hour of silent meditation, the student will find that there is one space of silence within themselves, where you can find refuge from thoughts and desires, from the turmoil of the senses and the delusions of the mind. By sinking your consciousness deep into the heart, you can reach this place. At first, only when you are alone in silence and darkness, but when the need for the silence has grown great enough, you will turn to seek it, even in the midst of the struggle with self, and you will find it. Only you must not let go of this outer self or the body. You must learn to retire into the citadel where the battle grows fierce, but to do so without losing sight of the battle, without allowing oneself to fancy that by so doing you have won the victory. That victory is won only when all is silence without, as within the inner citadel. Fighting thus from within that silence, the student will find that they have solved the first great paradox. I'm now going to speak about Catherine, whose name before she married, Kolishkini, and she was born in 1896. So by the time she was born, Helen Blavatsky had passed 5 years previous. I often wondered whether they would have known each other, but, well, perhaps they do now. She also was born into a very affluent family in Russia in 1896. Her father was half Polish, and thus a strong Catholic influence was always present in her life. Yet it was the distinctively Russian incarnation of the gospel that she experienced in her childhood. Through the liturgy of the Russian Orthodox Church, the practices of living faith with which her parents filled their home, and the earthy piety of the Russian people themselves, skeptics, sinners, as well as saints, Catherine received the great spiritual traditions and symbols of the Christian East. At 15, she was married to the Baron Boris de Heck. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, they lived through the terrors of communist persecution and shared with all Russians the agonies of starvation and civil war. Finally, they escaped with only the clothes on their backs and made their way to England. In 1921, they arrived in Canada, penniless, and soon a baby son. Although they were in poor health, the immigrant baron and baroness worked hard. He is an architect, she is a laundress, a maid, and a waitress. In this way, she came to know the people of North America through friendships with some wealthy people who knew her as the Baroness. She also came to know a great number of the working poor who called her simply Katie. Soon, Catherine's energy and her gift for public speaking enabled her to find work with a lecture bureau. Within a few years, she was one of its executives. Suddenly, she found she was prosperous, large apartments, many books, a nurse for her son, important friends, all these fruits of prosperity and position she was able to have and enjoy. Then in the midst of this new affluence, she began to wonder if God had saved her from death in Russia, only to make her a comfortable bourgeois in North America. The words of Christ haunted her: "Sell all you possess and give it to the poor, and come follow me." It seemed madness, and she tried to close her mind to these words, which she has described as sounding within her like the faint, disjointed stammerings of a dying man. She could not escape them, but when she went to the priests for advice, they told her she was deluded and that her son was God's will for her. In 1930, after several years of anguish, she went to the Bishop of Toronto, who told her she did indeed have a vocation from God, to pray for another year, after which he would give his blessing and support. Eventually, she made arrangements for her son's education, sold or gave away what she could, and then the young mother and her son went to live in the slums of a Toronto crippled by the Depression. I think this was when she and her husband, the Baron, went their separate ways. Catherine went simply to be with the poor, to love them and serve them very quietly, to become their friend, to pray with them. She had not intended to found Friendship House or anything else, but when others saw the way she lived, they wanted to join her. Men and women flocked to her in smaller numbers, but in the same way that people later flocked to Mother Teresa in Calcutta. There was an intensity to her faith and to her love for the poor that lit a flame in many. Her boldness and her strangeness, however, also scandalized others. And after a few years, misunderstanding and untruths, similar here to HPB, drove her out of Toronto. Her first Friendship House was finished. Fairly soon, a priest, Father John Lafarge, arranged to have Catherine invited to New York to work in Harlem. She started Friendship House again, alone and in absolute poverty. Once again, people came to share her life. The interracial apostolate grew in New York and expanded to other cities in the United States, to Chicago, Washington, and Portland. Friendship House became well known, if not necessarily well thought of, in the Catholic Church in North America at that time. She shared with her activist friend, Dorothy Day, the harsh struggle to move the social teachings of the Church out of books into people's hearts. Even if a few, such as the young Thomas Merton, recognized in her the power of the Spirit and her unwavering fidelity to Christ's Church, many were frightened by her Russianness or her bluntness. Others could not grasp the largeness of her vision, especially as her Russian faith experience differed so vastly from theirs. After a difference of opinion over the nature of the Friendship House apostolate, Catherine once again found herself called into the uncharted waters of change. This time, however, Catherine did not have to start alone. In 1943, she and Eddie Doherty, the famous newspaperman, were married by Bishop Shield in his private chapel in Chicago. In 1947, they travelled with one of the Friendship House staff to Combermere, a little village 180 miles northeast of Toronto, where the Bishop of Pembroke had invited her to continue somehow her work. In bewilderment, they came here, sure of nothing, yet on the day of their arrival, they planted a small apple orchard. Somehow they knew they had come home, and the strange dark vision of prayer, love, and simple service of the poor, which Catherine had been given, would not be lost. Eventually, men and women came and stayed, including priests who stayed too. The apostolate, now called Madonna House, grew slowly until their numbers grew to over 125 full-time members and developed many different missions, 12, each of which is a house of friendship, a place of prayer and simple love. Catherine and Eddie took a vow of celibacy in 1955, at the time when the community decided to establish itself more formally in the church, though still keeping its lay character. Eddie was ordained a priest in the Melkite Rite in 1969, and Catherine spent many years writing many books and public speaking, not just for her own community, but for thousands of others. She eventually became respected and accepted in the church. Her journey outwards had always been a journey inwards, towards the fire of the living God burning in her heart. As she has moved, the Spirit has cast that fire about her on every side. Her pilgrimage has always been a standing still in the center of her own heart, where she says, "All in me is stillness, silence, where I am immersed in the silence of God." In the deep stillness, where nothing is everything, I find the answers. Catherine has heard that silence, and it has made her a free woman. She was led out of the peace of her childhood through a terrible persecution to a strange land and a strange calling, and was brought to the Pastinia of her own heart. There she has filled her solitude with the men and the women of the whole earth. So what does Poustinia mean? Poustinia isn't a thing, it's a practice. It is part of the Russian Orthodox tradition of seeking solitude and fasting in order to remove the distractions that prevent us from hearing the word of God. A pustin, P-O-U-S-T-Y-N, is a Russian word for a small, sparsely furnished cabin or room where a person goes to pray and fast alone in the presence of God. The word pustin has its origin in the Russian word for desert. A person called to live permanently in a pustinia is called a pustinik. A pustinik is one who has been called by God with a vocation to live life in the desert pustinia, alone with God, and the service of humanity through prayer, fasting, that was the seed, and availability to those who might call upon them. Those called to life in the Pastinia were not uncommon in Russia prior to the suppression of Christianity in the early 20th century. It was regarded as a vocation, and historically, one who has experienced the call to the Pastinia had first, after securing the blessing of their spiritual director, to find a village. Generally, this was done through pilgrimage and prayer. Having discovered the village to which they felt God drawing them, the Poustinik went to the elders and asked permission to live there as a Poustinik. Permission was happily given, as Russians were glad to have a Poustinik praying for them. The Poustinik lives alone, praying for their own salvation, the salvation of the world, and particularly for the community that God has blessed for him to be a member of. Traditionally, the Poustinik was available to the people. Where there were special needs, such as a fire to fight or hay to bring in, the Poustinia would help. Whenever a villager had something they wanted to talk about, a question about prayer, a special joy or sorrow, they could go to the Poustinia. The Poustinia is one who listens and shares the love of Christ with all whom they encounter, as well as sharing food, drink, whatever they have, they share, as Christ has shared all with them. In 1975, Catherine Doherty wrote a best-selling book, Christian Spirituality of the East for Western Man. Apologies for the non-inclusive title. Although originating with wise Russian elders called Starzy, Catherine's popular book made the concept of Pastinia acceptable to modern Western people. Here is her book here. It's a wonderful little book. In this book, she describes the Pastinia as an entry into the desert, a lonely place, a silent place where one can lift the two arms of penance and prayer to God in reparation, intercession for one's wrongdoings and those of one's brothers and sisters. In her words, to go into the Pastinia means to listen to God. It means entering into kenosis, the emptying of oneself, so as to be a clear vessel for the grace of God. She believes a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. That came from the Four Quartets written by T.S. Eliot, and that condition of complete simplicity is what she strove for. She promoted the Pastinia as a place where anyone in any walk of life can go for 24 hours of silence, solitude, and prayer. Ultimately, however, the Pastinia's call is to the desert of one's own heart, wherein one dwells with God alone, whether in the marketplace or in a solitary local retreat. In her book, writing about the Pastinia, she is not writing so much about a technique of prayer as a journey into God, her own, and if we want, ours. It's a journey filled with marvels and challenges, but a journey open to all who want to take it. It sounds exotic, remote, yet Catherine shows that it is simply the secret room where we have been told about, where we shall find the reward of the presence if we go there in faith. She tells us of other treasures we will find, of defenselessness, poverty, liberation. She shares with us her knowledge of what it means to fight for the world at the center of that darkness that threatens to overwhelm the earth. We are seeing this darkness in Russia right now as Russian troops are gathering at the border of Ukraine. Catherine reminds us too that Christ's mother, the world mother, the mother of the world, stands with us in this place of poverty and weakness to strengthen us with her yes. But most of all, Catherine holds up to us a vision of cosmic tenderness in the desert. Our hearts are transformed with Christ's consciousness. There we become gentle and compassionate and learn tenderness to ourselves and our brothers and sisters. They become our joy. Mercy is the Pastinic's, the Christian, and the Theosophist's true availability to the presence within and their community. In her book, Catherine talks about the Pastinia being a kenotic way of life, but the very fact that you are in the Pastinia means you're tending towards self-emptying. It has many dimensions. Its final goal is holy indifference. These are just two words, but they will take a lifetime. As Theosophists, this is our task, to transform ourselves. Yeah, I think that explains something of what we are called to do. I want to unfold. I don't want to stay folded anywhere, because where I am folded, there I am alive. So, transformation of our emotions. Jeffrey Hodgson, in his book, Thus Have I Heard, has written an interesting piece about transforming our emotions. There is no room for personality in the spiritual life. Neither is there a place on the path of occultism for childish idiosyncrasies, moods, self-indulgences, emotional outbursts, and the littleness of human life. If we seek to enter the path with these unconquered, we shall bring trouble and suffering upon ourselves and others, and inevitably injure any work in which we may engage. He then goes on to give us an illustration. The horse chestnut provides us with a useful illustration of the necessity for this impersonality. The fruit is surrounded by a thick husk or shell. In the course of time, this husk becomes brittle and develops a number of spikes. The spikes harden until a protective, prickly covering is formed. In due time, the nut falls to the ground, the shell breaks open, and the shining fruit is revealed. Only then is it capable of producing a tree. The time for the breaking of the shell has come for us. The personality with all its spikes must be transformed. So that came from Jeffrey Hodgson. And I have something else here from Dr. Roberto Assagioli that some of you may have heard of. He developed psychosynthesis, which is an excellent therapy. Behind every individual, there is an imprisoned soul. Every soul is manifesting through a more or less imperfect, blind, and rebellious personality. This recognition is the most important and immediate purpose of our being. With this realization comes the responsibility of drawing out the potential of all with the establishment of right relations with oneself and other selves brings a growing group awareness. Then our attitude and behavior radically begins to change. So how do we do this? I can give you nothing that has not already its origins within yourself. I can throw open no picture gallery but your own. I can help make your own world visible. That is all. So in other words, we have to be willing to go on the journey of self-transformation. Requires commitment. It requires determination, and we need to use the will. So I thought that was quite fitting. No one can force you to do this. So we're offered many opportunities often through crisis, to look at the ways our lives are not working. This theosophy must be made practical and to be disencumbered of useless discussion. It has to find objective expression and an all-embracing code of life, thoroughly impregnated with its spirit, the spirit of mutual tolerance, charity, and love. And that is from the letters from the Masters of Wisdom. So some of the opportunities that we have, we could find someone we trust, a good friend, maybe a counselor or a psychologist can be helpful to talk to. Looking at courses can be helpful that can help us with aspects of our lives. Personality study, yoga, creative arts, journaling. In Theosophy, we have the course developed by Vic Houchin, The Process of Self-Transformation. In this course, many very valuable tools are given for our healing. Vic talks about how the regular practice of meditation has a cumulative effect on our consciousness, character, and personality. There are numerous opportunities and teachings within the TS that can help on our journey of self-discovery, websites, books, courses, articles. John Sell's book on practical spirituality has many suggestions and workshops, including meditation workshops. In Theosophy, the teaching on the 7 rays is an excellent method of discovering how we are influenced by the rays that we are on. It also gives opportunities of learning, understanding, and compassion for people who have a different ray structure. Many of you will have found your own transformative ways. Maybe these could be something to share in your branches. I'm sure you have many, many more ideas. My transformative journey began after reading Catherine's books many years ago. I discovered in making my own Pastinia retreat the silence and stillness, and also the necessity of dealing with issues as I entered my inner world. It was life-changing and led to a career for many years as a therapist and counsellor, working with individuals and groups who wanted to look deeply into their lives and begin the purification so essential to following an authentic spiritual path. Meditation, the ageless wisdom teachings, and the rays have been such gifts. This is a very beautiful poem. Stillness. There is a calm unutterable abiding deep within the soul. There is a peace unshakable, a resting place within the mind. There is a silence undisturbable in which abides the self. Sink into that calm, abide in that peace, enter the silence undisturbable. It comes from Jeffrey Hodgson, and it's about 3 parts to that poem, but it's just been printed in a beautiful book written by Elizabeth Sell.
Put together
By Elizabeth Sell with her art and other people's, but also Jeffrey's poems. So it's very special. It's hot off the press, and I thoroughly recommend it. So as I look at 2 Russian women, I look at the similarities between Catherine Doughty and Madame Blavatsky. They both had the courage and determination to listen to the voice that led them to become pilgrims through many lands, pioneering new ways of thinking. They were immigrants far away from their countries and families. They were visionaries from Russia with very different ways of being from women in the West at that time. They both suffered persecution, poverty, rejection, ridicule. They were often unsupported in their organisation or with authorities in the church, in Catherine Doughty's case. They both left unsatisfactory relationships, endured many trials and tests, and both eventually found spiritual males who supported them in their work. They both travelled extensively, giving lectures in many countries, and both were prolific writers whose works and presence have changed hundreds of thousands of lives. Both women led lives of total service. Helen Blavatsky's early writings and messages were to get the ageless wisdom teachings to the world. This was the work the Masters of Wisdom wanted her to bring into the world. In her later years, HPB, in her book, The Voice of the Silence, has given the mystical teaching of the Buddha. It may be asked, what is mysticism? Mysticism implies a direct or an unveiled perception of truth. Rohit Mehta, in his book, The Creative Silence, Reflections on the Voice of the Silence, writes how it represents esoteric Buddhism, evidently belonging to the contemplative school of Buddhism. In fact, it deals with the art and science of meditation, meditation in all its 3 aspects of concentration, absorption, and contemplation. It may be asked what the underlying philosophy of the Voice of the Silence is. Almost at the very beginning of the book, HPB gives the main teaching, but in 1 sentence. The mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. Catherine's message was mystical. Seek God in the silence through prayer, meditation, fasting, and self-emptying. Catherine has raised awareness of retreats, hermitages, and monasteries, and withdrawing into the silence as people seek and continue to, especially at this time, I believe is the most wonderful opportunity for the world to retreat to the Pastinia of their hearts. We are being given those opportunities. Catherine's cause for canonization as a saint is now under consideration by the Catholic Church. Both women have had lives of service and leave great legacies. They have brought great gifts from Russia to the West. And as I was writing this, I became very aware of the synchronicity of writing of two Russian women at this particular time in the world, when the situation in Russia is so serious, with Russian troops really increasing daily on the borders of the Ukraine. I would like to invite you, if you are willing, to take a few minutes to silently link together. We'll take 5 minutes. Thank you for your participation in that. And I thank you. I thank you for all joining with us as we consider the Pastinia of the heart and maybe our call to stillness. Thank you, everybody.